at this point forward where we really get into the substance. We've started to talk about a few issues in terms of the overview, but what we want to do in each of the different chapters is explain the different priorities that we've looked at, why they're important, what our assessment is in terms of whether or not policies and plans are in place, actions are happening, and progress is being made. And then just explain very briefly the recommendations that we've made to the government, that obviously we're hoping the government will accept when they give their response to Parliament on the 15th of October. In terms of the adaptation priority, we've already covered these to a degree, but recognising there are a range of different pressures on the built environment in terms of climate hazards in the first column, flooding, water scarcity, drought, heavy rainfall, overwhelming sewers, as well as sea level rise, and increasingly, a higher average and extreme temperatures, but also drivers in terms of population growth, demographic change, and economic growth, and a tendency towards average property occupancy falling. Certainly that's been the trend of recent decades, increasing the demand for housing, which obviously means that we have seen less urban green space and increased kind of urban infill in heavily populated areas. And we've divided up the built environment chapter into 6 main themes, as David has already talked about. 4 that relate to flood risk, and then 2 other risks, one to do with heat-related health impacts, and lastly to do with water demand in the built environment. And there's quite a different picture on each of those different risks. And in our overall assessment, we've already seen that we are flagging 3 of the built environment increasing. So we've talked about surface water flood management, where there are plans in place. There is a policy framework provided by the Flood and Water Management Act, but certainly progress by a local authority is not in keeping with the kind of requirements of the Act. Policy around SUDs in new developments being weakened. Trends in permeable paving are still not picking up the pace that we'd like to see. Excellent. So we talked about residual flood risk to existing buildings, and also about heat-related health impacts that we assessed in terms of the heatwave plan. One, a positive story in terms of the heatwave plan, but we're not yet adapting the built environment so that people can, internal temperatures within buildings, not just homes, but also care homes and hospitals, can be at a kind of tolerable level when external temperatures start to rise. But in terms of water demand in the built environment, certainly trends are going in the right direction in terms of increasing penetration of water metering. More households are paying a price which reflects the amount of water they use, which of course is a very positive trend, but that trend needs to continue in future years for progress to continue. Just wanted to focus on a couple of charts which help tell the story, really. This is where we start to delve, which I mentioned earlier. So all these charts, if you can't find them in the report, it's because they're in the underlying technical annexes, which are published online on the publications page of the CCC website. Just scroll down and find the built environment dashboard, built environment technical annex, and you'll find this chart, which actually we first published back in 2012, I believe, which showed the trends in development in urban areas, showing that there's been a reduction in natural surfacing in urban areas, and that's primarily caused by, well, 2 factors. First of all, the loss of gardens, front gardens, and road verges. So overall, there's about a 7% net reduction in urban green space, and about 2/3 of that is due to people paving over front gardens, back gardens, and also loss of grass and other natural surfacing for road verges. And the other 1/3 of the loss in urban green space is down to increased development on greenfield sites. So we're seeing trends going in the wrong direction. Of course, urban green space is important for a range of different purposes and needs. It delivers flood risk management, natural flood risk management, by slowing down the water cycle. The water, when it obviously infiltrates into aquifers, is better quality. So instead of water going into sewers, which needs to be cleaned up before it can be returned either to the environment or back into the drinking water supply, it'd be much better for that water to infiltrate naturally and kind of get through to the water system in that way. Also in terms of air quality, and also in terms of heat stress, of course, in the built environment. Having urban green space is great for people, places for people to escape higher temperatures in buildings, to be able to, to be kept kind of so that they're comfortable in higher temperatures. So that's one trend that we're going to continue to monitor, and at the moment is going in the wrong direction. And one of the recommendations we make is for the government to adopt and deliver a goal to reverse the loss of urban green space, because it is so important for a range of different needs, and for DCLG in particular to work with local governments to deliver that goal. As I mentioned earlier, that we see in terms of surface water flood risk management, only at the last data set we had suggests that only 1/6 of lead local flood authorities across England have an adopted and agreed local flood risk management strategy in place. And these documents are so key to how flood risks are managed locally, because they explain to the general public and to other partners who's doing what. Okay, I just paused because my screen has changed and I can only see myself, which is not altogether pleasant. Can people still hear me?
No, we can hear you fine, but your screen has indeed disappeared.
Can people still? Okay. Well, if I carry on talking, hopefully the technology will sort itself out. So so local flood risk management strategies are so key to how flood risks are managed more generally, because they bring together the partners and explains who does what. And until you have an agreed strategy, it's very difficult for those partners to be held to account for what they have done and what they should be doing. There are key aspects, a statutory aspect of the Flood and Water Management Act in 2010, and the fact that only 1/6 of authorities have actually got that statutory plan in place is obviously of a considerable concern. We know that local authorities are working hard on this, that we expect the next set of results that will come out probably in September to be much better, which is why we expect the trend to be moving in the right direction, obviously, but we still expect in September with the next results to show that still less than half of local flood authorities will have a strategy in place. If I briefly mention, we've also published new data as part of this report on the rate of development in the floodplain. That's in 2012, we looked back to 2001 to see how many new properties have appeared in the floodplain according to the Ordnance Survey address layer master map, and we've updated that with the latest Ordnance Survey data in terms of individual addresses and the latest National Flood Risk Assessment from the Environment Agency. And this just looks at river and coastal flooding first of all, and it just looks at homes. It doesn't look at other properties, other buildings and businesses that are located on the floodplain. But it shows that development in the floodplain is continuing, and in fact since 2001 there's been about 250,000 new homes built in different parts of the floodplain, but that at least that planning policy means that the majority of those are built in the lower risk parts. So where we've looked, we've seen that most of the homes that are built in lower risk areas, and in fact that the Environment Agency obviously gives advice to planning authorities and developers in terms of building in the floodplain, and they respond to all development, all residential development at least, in areas that are at risk of flooding from 1 in 100 annual chance of flooding or greater. So those areas are the kind of red and the orange in the kind of first half of the last decade, and in more recent years about new homes built in areas of river and coastal flood risk. And so the overall trend it certainly is not getting worse, but it's not getting much better either. That we're still seeing new homes built even in the highest risk parts of the country. On average, about 1,500 new homes are built in the highest risk area in red, and about 3,100 homes are built in areas of medium flood risk, which is between a 1 in 30 and a 1 in 100 annual chance of flooding. The fact that the environment actions that they've raised tend to be followed and adopted and adhered to by planning authorities is obviously encouraging, but the mere fact that we're still seeing more and more homes built in flood risk areas means that future the Environment Agency is planning its long-term flood risk scenarios. So the scenarios they published in at the end of 2014 assume that there is no new development in the floodplain, and as soon as you factor in that development, the justifiable expenditure on flood risk increases, and it certainly increases beyond current budgets as they stand for the next 6 years. So that is one area where we obviously are flagging that there is a potential issue here, certainly a long-term issue, because of not in terms of the planning policy itself, but how it is to a close the overall message on the built environment. Yeah, we are certainly seeing progress in many areas. Obviously, lots of effort going into managing flood risk, particularly at community scale, and improving water efficiency. But overall, we're not yet adapting the built environment to cope with the future extremes in weather that we can expect. Flood risk in rivers in the sea is being managed according to kind of a long-term policy framework with now a 6-year investment plan in place, and the planning policy obviously takes account of climate change and is being implemented in line with that by planning authorities and the Environment Agency, but that still means that more homes are being built in high-risk areas. Water demand is an area, as I say, we're flagging as green at the moment because there certainly is progress with more and more metering being rolled out to households, other demand-side measures being implemented by water companies, and overall consumption is gradually reducing. But there's still scope to go much further and faster, which would deliver a range of different benefits in terms of costs to households where they are paying for their consumption, but also in terms of the amount of water we then need to abstract from the environment. And areas of further progress, we talked about surface water flood risk management and the fact that the SUDS proposals in the new regime that introduced in April is much weaker than Sir Michael Pitt recommended back in 2008, and that we're seeing low uptake of SUDS in general within new development. We're seeing more homes not just being built in high-risk areas, but because of climate change, more and more existing homes will fall into the highest flood risk category. The floodary, as we mentioned, is counterproductive. It manages the financial consequence of flooding, but flooding will still take place, and the long-term answer has to be about flood risk management, and as yet floodary actually is counterproductive because it takes away the incentive for flood risks to be managed, and that we're not yet adequately addressing the risk of heat stress in the built environment. We're focusing too much so far just on the emergency event and not about adapting the buildings so they can be kept cool in the summer months. I don't